The shuttle docked at Halon Prime with a soft hiss of pressure equalization, and Han Do-yoon stepped into the corridor, carrying everything he owned in a single gray bag. The air tasted different here. It was clean in a way that felt wrong, like someone had scrubbed every molecule and put it back in perfect order. He missed the salt smell of the Busan coastline already, but he kept that thought to himself and walked forward. Halon Prime was the largest neutral station in the Galactic Union. A massive ring of metal and glass, spinning slowly in the empty dark between three star systems. At its center sat the Galactic Union Military Academy, where the best cadets from over 200 species came to train as officers for the Union fleet. It was the most prestigious school in known space, and Do-yoon was the first human ever allowed through its doors. He found his barracks without asking anyone for directions. The hallway signs were in Universal Standard, which he had studied for 2 years before the transfer. His room was small, barely larger than a closet, with a thin bed and a window that looked out into the stars. He set his bag down, changed into his cadet uniform, and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. He took one slow breath, then another, and then he stood and walked to his first class. Lecture Hall 7 was enormous. The seats rose in curved tiers like the inside of a bowl, and every seat was filled with cadets from species Do-yoon had only ever seen in briefing documents. There were tall, four-armed Rethani with gray skin and sharp eyes. There were feathered Oshai who clicked their beaks when they were nervous. There were crystalline Dravari who stood nearly 3 meters tall and shimmered under the lights. There were dozens more, all shapes and colors and sizes, and every single one of them turned to look at Do-yoon when he walked in. He was smaller than most of them, softer looking. He had dark hair, a calm face, and the kind of quiet eyes that made people think he was not paying attention, when in fact he was paying attention to everything. He bowed slightly to the cadets nearest the door, which confused them, and then he walked down to the front row and sat in the very first seat. A feathered Oshai cadet was already sitting nearby. She had bright orange plumage and sharp golden eyes, and she looked at Do-yoon the way someone might look at a small animal that had wandered into the wrong place. Her name was Mirin, and she leaned toward him slightly. "You are new," she said. It was not a question. Do-yoon nodded. "First day." Mirin tilted her head. "What species are you? I have not seen your kind before." "Terran," Do-yoon said simply. "Provisional member." Mirin blinked, but said nothing more, because the lights dimmed, and the instructor walked in. Instructor Valis was a Rethani, tall and broad, with 4 arms that he used to gesture dramatically as he spoke. His voice filled the lecture hall like a rolling storm, deep and confident and completely sure of itself. He taught the Survival and Hostile Environments course, and he was famous across the academy for one thing: making cadets afraid. "Welcome to your first lesson," Valis said, his 4 hands clasped behind his back. "Today we discuss the most dangerous places in the known galaxy. Places where no trained soldier, no matter how prepared, would be expected to survive. We call them death worlds." He tapped a control panel, and the center of the lecture hall came alive with a massive holographic display. A planet appeared, covered in green acid oceans. Valis explained that a single drop of that water would dissolve bone in seconds. The cadets shifted uncomfortably. Another planet appeared, a world of living forests where the trees hunted anything that moved. Then, a world of perpetual volcanic fire, where the ground itself was alive and angry. Each planet earned gasps, whispers, nervous clicking from the Oshai cadets, and a low hum of distress from the Dravari. Do-yoon watched quietly and wrote notes in his small notebook. He wrote in Korean, in neat, careful letters that no one else in the room could read. Then Valis paused. He looked out at the class with a slow, heavy expression, and his voice dropped. "Now," he said, "I will show you the worst one." The hologram changed. A blue and green planet appeared, swirling with white clouds. It looked almost beautiful, almost peaceful. But Wallace began listing facts, and the beauty drained from the room like water from a cracked glass. Earthquakes that could flatten entire cities, volcanoes that could block out the sun, oceans that covered 70% of the surface, filled with predators that had evolved for hundreds of millions of years to kill efficiently. Temperature swings from -89 degrees to +56 degrees. A dominant species that had split the atom and used it as a weapon against themselves. Not once, multiple times. The cadets were pale, or whatever their species equivalent of pale was. Several had stopped breathing. One Dravari in the back row made a sound like cracking glass, which Do-Hyun later learned was the sound they made when they were terrified. Wallace let the silence hang. Then he spoke again. "No cadet in this room," he said slowly, "no matter how trained, how augmented, or how determined, would survive 72 standard cycles on this world. Its classification is Death World, Class 12, the highest rating we have. Its name is Earth." The hologram zoomed in on the surface. Storms, wildfires, a massive ocean wave swallowing a coastline, predators with hundreds of teeth, and then footage of the dominant species, humans, running, building, fighting, surviving. Do-Hyun did not flinch. He did not shift in his seat. He kept his pen on his notebook and his eyes on the display, the way someone might watch a home video of a place they had not visited in a long time. Mirren leaned toward him again. Her feathers were pressed flat against her body, which meant she was frightened. "That planet," she whispered. "Do you think anything actually lives there?" Do-Hyun looked at her. He gave a small, polite smile, the kind that did not show teeth, because he had already learned that showing teeth made most aliens nervous. "About 8 billion things." Mirren let out a short, clicking laugh, the kind that meant she thought he was joking, and desperately hoped he was. Do-Hyun turned back to his notebook and continued writing. In neat Korean script, he wrote a single line at the bottom of the page. "They think we are monsters. I will show them what we really are." He closed the notebook and folded his hands and waited for the lecture to end. The first week passed without incident, and Do-Hyun kept his head down. He arrived early to every class, sat in the front row, took notes in Korean, and spoke only when spoken to. Most cadets ignored him. He was small, quiet, and belonged to a species no one had heard of. In a school full of towering Dravari and sharp-clawed Sathari, Do-Hyun was easy to overlook. That changed on the 8th day, during the endurance trial. The Academy's training grounds were located in the lower ring of Halon Prime, a vast open space that had been designed to simulate different planetary conditions. For the endurance trial, the gravity was set to standard Union levels, and the cadets were ordered to run a continuous circuit until they could not run anymore. The instructors would monitor their vitals and pull them out when their bodies showed signs of critical failure. The first cadets dropped within 15 minutes. The HFY, built for quick bursts of speed, earned through their energy fast and collapsed with their beaks open, gasping for air. The Dravari lasted longer, but their heavy crystalline bodies overheated quickly, and they had to stop before their core structures cracked. Even the Rathani, who were considered one of the strongest species in the Union, began slowing after 40 minutes. Do-Hyun kept running. His body was sweating heavily, his face was flushed red, his heart rate was elevated, and the monitoring officers frowned at their screens because every readout suggested he should be in distress. But Do-Hyun's breathing was steady, his legs kept moving, his pace did not change. At the 50-minute mark, an officer flagged the medical team. The Terran's core temperature is rising. His body is leaking fluid from the surface. "I think his cooling system is failing." The medical officer, A thin Rathani with 2 sets of glasses, pulled up Do-hyun's file and read it twice. Then she said, very quietly, "That is not a system failure. That is how his species regulates heat. He is supposed to do that." The officer stared at her. "He is supposed to leak?" "Yes." Do-hyun ran for another 30 minutes after that. When he finally stopped, it was not because his body failed. It was because the course was over, and there was no one left to run against. He stood at the finish line, breathing hard, and wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He looked around at the other cadets, most of whom were sitting or lying on the ground, and he felt a small twist of guilt for standing when they could not. He walked over to Loon, the massive Dravari cadet who had collapsed early with a hairline crack running down his left arm. None of the other Dravari had come to check on him. On their homeworld, a cracked Dravari was considered damaged, and damaged things were left behind. Do-hyun sat down next to him. "Does it hurt?" he asked. Loon looked down at him with wide, glassy eyes. He was nearly 3 times Do-hyun's size, but in that moment he looked very small. "It is not about pain," Loon said. "It is about what the crack means." Do-hyun nodded slowly. He did not ask what the crack meant. He could see it in the way Loon held his arm close to his body, the way he would not look at the other Dravari. Instead, Do-hyun reached into his bag and pulled out a small roll of repair tape he had brought from Earth. It was industrial grade, the kind his cousin Taesun used to patch gear in the field. "May I?" Do-hyun asked. Loon hesitated, then extended his arm. Do-hyun wrapped the crack carefully, pressing the tape into the edges so it held firm. It would not heal the crystal, but it covered the crack, and when Loon stood up, no one could see the damage anymore. Loon stared at his arm for a long time. Then he looked at Do-hyun and said, "Why did you do that?" Do-hyun shrugged. "Where I come from, we fix things." The next test came 3 days later, a toxic atmosphere drill. The cadets were placed in a sealed chamber, and a mild corrosive gas was slowly pumped in. The goal was to remain inside as long as possible, while maintaining focus and completing a series of mental tasks on a screen. One by one, the cadets tapped out as the gas irritated their skin, their lungs, their eyes. Do-hyun lasted longest by a wide margin. When the instructor asked him how he had endured it, Do-hyun paused and thought about it honestly. He had grown up in an industrial port city. He had breathed worse on his morning walk to school. But he did not say that. He simply said, "Practice, sir." The following week brought combat simulations. Do-hyun's squad was assigned to clear a simulated hostile environment, and they encountered a large predator construct that charged from the shadows. Mirin screamed and dove behind a wall. Loon froze completely, his crystalline body locking in place the way his species did when threatened. The 4th squad member, a Sethari cadet named Voss, raised his weapon but could not get a clear shot. Do-hyun picked up a rock. He watched the predator for exactly 3 seconds. He noted the way it moved, the way it favored its left side, the way its neck was slightly exposed when it turned. Then he threw the rock, hard and precise, at the joint where the creature's skull met its spine. The construct dropped. Mirin came out from behind the wall, her feathers standing straight up. "How did you know where to hit it?" Do-hyun looked at the fallen construct. "Everything has a weak point," he said. "You just have to watch." That evening, Instructor Wallace pulled Do-hyun's cadet file again. It was still heavily redacted. Species, Terran. Homeworld, classified. Background, classified. Medical profile, restricted. Wallace stared at the file for a long time and then walked to Commander Zhal's office. Zhal was a Sethari, cold-blooded in every sense. He sat behind a desk made of dark metal and listened to Wallace with his yellow eyes half closed. "The Terran is performing beyond expected parameters," Wallace said. "His endurance, his pain tolerance, his tactical instincts, Something is wrong with his file. Jal was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Nothing is wrong with his file. It is exactly as the Union Diplomatic Office wants it to be." "Then what is he?" Jal opened his eyes fully. "He is a test. The humans want to see if they belong here. And there are those in the Union who want to see if they should be allowed to stay. Watch him, Wallace, but do not touch him. Not yet." That night, Do-Yun sat alone in his small room and ate a cup of instant ramyun he had smuggled aboard in his bag. The noodles were soft and salty and tasted like home. He thought about the way Lewin had looked at his arm after Do-Yun had wrapped it. He thought about the way Mirren had screamed in the simulation. He thought about the look on Wallace's face when Do-Yun had outlasted every cadet on the track. He thought about his cousin Tayson standing in the rain on a mountain trail outside Busan, shouting over the wind. "The world will try to kill you every single day. You do not fight it, Do-Yun. You just outlast it. You keep going when everything tells you to stop. That is what makes us what we are." Do-Yun finished his noodles, washed the cup, and went to sleep. Tomorrow there would be more tests, more eyes watching him, more questions he was not ready to answer. But he would get up. He would show up early. He would sit in the front row. And he would keep going. Instructor Wallace spent 3 weeks preparing for his next lecture on Earth. He requested classified footage from the Union's deep space observation probes, filed formal access requests through 2 different intelligence departments, and called in favors from contacts he had not spoken to in years. He told himself it was for educational purposes. He told himself the cadets needed to understand what a true death world looked like. But deep in the back of his mind, in the place where pride lived and grew like a weed, Wallace knew the truth. He wanted to break the quiet Terran boy who sat in the front row and never flinched. The lecture was scheduled for a Thursday. By Wednesday night, the entire academy knew something big was coming. Wallace had never requested a double-length session before, and the cadets filled Lecture Hall 7 to capacity. Even cadets from other courses came to watch, standing along the walls and sitting in the aisles. Mirren was in her usual seat near Do-Hyun. Lewin stood at the back, too large for most chairs. Cadet Voss, the Sithari, sat in the middle rows with his arms crossed and his yellow eyes fixed on the holographic projector. Do-Hyun arrived early, as always. He sat down, opened his notebook, and waited. Wallace walked in and did not greet the class. He simply turned on the projector and let the footage speak for itself. The first clip showed a human field medic performing emergency surgery on a wounded soldier in the middle of a desert. There was no hospital, no sterile room. The medic used a knife, a needle, and a pair of hands that did not shake even once. The wounded soldier was awake the entire time, biting down on a piece of leather, and when the procedure was over, he stood up and walked. The lecture hall was completely silent. The second clip showed a race, not a battle, not an escape. Hundreds of humans running across a desert that stretched to the horizon under a sun that burned at over 50 degrees. They ran for hours. Some of them collapsed and were carried by others. Some of them finished and then turned around to help the ones still running. They called this entertainment. The third clip was war. Organized, mechanized, relentless war. Machines that rolled across open ground and leveled entire cities. Soldiers who dug into the earth and held their positions for months. Explosions that turned the sky white. The footage was old, but it did not matter. The scale of it was enough. Several cadets in the upper rows stood up and left the hall. The fourth clip showed a human diving into a dark ocean, surrounded by massive creatures with rows of teeth that could crush bone. The human was not running from them. The human had chosen to be there. The human was smiling. And then Wallace played the last clip. It was shot during a typhoon on the coast of a peninsula that the file identified as the southern half of a divided landmass. The ocean was black and violent, waves rising higher than buildings and crashing down like the fists of something ancient and furious. A small boat was being torn apart in the water, and people were screaming. Then a rescue team arrived. They were humans in bright orange suits, strapped to a helicopter that swung wildly in the wind. One by one, they dropped into the water. The waves swallowed them and spat them back up, and they kept swimming. They grabbed the survivors and pulled them to safety, fighting the ocean with nothing but their bodies and their will. The audio was broken and full of static, but at one moment, one of the rescuers shouted something to his team. The words were in Korean, and the voice was strong and clear despite the storm. Do-Hyun's hand tightened around his pen until his knuckles turned white. He knew that voice. He had grown up listening to that voice. It was Kwon Tae-sun, his cousin, the man who had raised him after his parents died, the man who had taught him how to run, how to fight, how to survive, and how to stand up when the world pushed him down. Do-Hyun did not move. He did not breathe. He stared at the hologram and watched his cousin disappear into a black wave and come back up with a child in his arms. And something inside his chest pulled so tight he thought it might snap. Wallace turned off the projector. The hall was dim and silent. He let the silence sit for a long time, and then he spoke. "This is why Earth is classified as a death world," Wallace said. His voice was calm and measured, but there was something underneath it, something that might have been fear. Not because of its storms, or its predators, or its volcanoes, because of its dominant species. They are relentless, they are adaptive, they do not stop. They have fought their own planet for their entire existence, and they have won every single time. He paused and looked directly at Do-Hyun. "Wouldn't you agree, Cadet Han?" The hall went cold. 200 pairs of eyes turned to Do-Hyun. Miran's beak fell open. Lewin made a sound like breaking ice. Voss uncrossed his arms and leaned forward. Wallace continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "For those of you who have not reviewed the updated Cadet roster, allow me to clarify. Cadet Han Do-Hyun is not from a provisional colony. He is not from an allied outpost. He is Terran. He was born on the planet you just watched. He grew up there. He survived there for 22 years. Earth is his home." The reaction was immediate. Cadets scrambled out of the seats closest to Do-Hyun. Miran pressed herself back into her chair, her feathers flat against her body. A low, grinding hum filled the room as every Dravari present vibrated with stress. Someone in the back row dropped their data pad, and the sound of it hitting the floor was the loudest thing in the universe. Do-Hyun sat still for a long moment. Then, slowly, he stood. He was not tall. He was not broad. He did not have claws or armor or forearms. He was just a young man in a gray uniform, standing in the front row of a lecture hall, looking out at a room full of people who were suddenly afraid of him. He looked at Wallace first, then he looked at the class, and then he spoke, and his voice was steady and quiet, and carried the kind of weight that only comes from meaning every single word. "Everything the instructor showed you is real," Do-Hyun said. "Earth is exactly as dangerous as he says. The storms are real. The predators are real. I will not pretend otherwise." He paused, but he left something out. The room did not move. Every single clip he showed you, those humans were not trying to destroy. The medic was saving a life. The runners were testing themselves. The rescuers were pulling strangers from the water. Even the soldiers, most of them were fighting to protect something they loved. He looked at the now dark projector where the typhoon footage had played. Earth is a death world. I know that better than anyone in this room. I have buried people I loved because of what that planet can do. But Earth did not teach me how to kill a world. It taught me how to refuse to die on one. It taught me that when someone is drowning, you jump in after them, even if the water might kill you too. He stopped. The silence was enormous. I am not asking you to stop being afraid of me, he said. I am asking you to understand that fear is not the whole story. He sat down. No one spoke for a very long time. Valis stood at the podium with his forearms hanging at his sides and his mouth slightly open, and for the first time in his career, he had nothing to say. Mirren was the first to move. She looked at Do-hyun with her golden eyes wide and wet, and she did not move away. She stayed in her seat, right next to him, and after a moment she reached out with one feathered hand and touched his arm very lightly. Do-hyun looked at her. She looked at him. 8 billion, she whispered. He nodded. The final exam was announced 6 weeks before it happened, and every cadet at the academy felt the weight of it immediately. The exercise was simple in concept and brutal in practice. Squads of 4 would be dropped onto Korath 6, a harsh planet the academy used for testing, and they would have 5 days to travel 200 kilometers to an extraction point. They would carry limited supplies. They would face dangerous wildlife, extreme temperatures, and terrain that had been chosen specifically to push cadets past their limits. Squads that reached the extraction point with all 4 members would pass. Squads that lost even 1 member would fail. The squad assignments were posted on the barracks wall 3 weeks before the drop, and Do-hyun stood in front of the list with his hands at his sides and read his team. Han Do-hyun, Cadet Mirren, Cadet Loon, Cadet Voss. Mirren, who had been afraid of him, and then stopped being afraid. Loon, who was enormous and gentle and carried a crack in his arm that the world told him made him less. And Voss, the Safari cadet, who had made no secret of the fact that he considered humans to be a primitive and disgusting species that had no place in the Union. Do-hyun read the list twice, and then went to the training hall to prepare. The dropship released them over Korath 6 on a gray morning. The planet was semi-arid, covered in red dust and low, twisted plants that looked like they had been trying to grow and had given up halfway. The sky was the color of rust, and the air was thin and dry and tasted like metal. Their supply pod was supposed to land 50 meters from their position. Instead, it malfunctioned and crashed into a ravine 2 kilometers to the east. By the time they reached it, half their water was gone, all their food rations had been destroyed, and the emergency beacon was shattered into pieces too small to repair. Voss turned on Do-hyun immediately. "This is your fault," he said, his yellow eyes narrow and hot. "The pod was programmed to your coordinates. You miscalculated." Do-hyun did not argue. He looked at the broken supplies, then at the sky, then at the ground. He knelt and picked up a handful of the red soil and rubbed it between his fingers. Then he stood and started walking toward a cluster of rocks where he had seen moisture marks. "What are you doing?" Voss demanded. "Finding water," Do-hyun said without turning around. Within 2 hours, Do-hyun had built a basic water filter using layers of sand, gravel, and a piece of fabric torn from the inside of the ruined supply pod. The water it produced was cloudy and tasted like iron, but it was clean enough to drink. He found edible roots growing in the shade of the rock cluster by testing small amounts on his own skin first, watching for reactions, and then tasting them carefully. 2 of the 3 root types were safe. He showed the squad which ones to pull and how deep to dig. By nightfall, they had water, food, and a shelter built from stacked rocks, and the supply pod's torn shell. Voss said nothing. Mirren helped where she could. Lewin carried the heaviest stones without being asked. On the second day, Do-hyun navigated by the stars. Mirren watched him stare at the night sky for several minutes, and then point in a direction with absolute confidence. She did not understand how he could read a sky he had never seen before, and when she asked him, he explained that the principles were the same everywhere. Stars moved in patterns. Patterns could be learned. His cousin had taught him celestial navigation on fishing boats off the coast of Busan when he was 12 years old. "Your species memorizes the sky?" Miran asked. "Some of us do," Do-hyun said, "the ones who need to find their way home." On the third day, Lewin's cracked arm got worse. The thin atmosphere and temperature swings had stressed the crystal, and a new fracture line appeared running from his shoulder to his elbow. The pain was severe, and Lewin tried to hide it, but Do-hyun noticed the way he held his arm and the way his movements had slowed. Do-hyun stopped the squad and examined the crack. He took resin from one of the twisted plants, heated it over a small fire until it became thick and sticky, and carefully applied it along the fracture line, pressing it into every gap. Then he wrapped the arm with strips of fabric and secured it tight. Loon looked down at Do-hyun, this tiny creature barely a third of his size, carefully repairing the thing that his own people said could not be repaired. Adravari's cracks were permanent. They were marks of weakness. No one fixed them, because no one believed they were worth fixing. "Why do you keep doing this?" Loon asked, and his voice was barely a whisper. Do-hyun finished wrapping the arm and looked up at him. "Because you are part of my squad," he said, "and where I come from, you do not leave your squad behind." That night, the predators came. They were low, fast creatures with 6 legs and jaws that could crush stone. They moved in packs, and hunted by sound and heat, and they surrounded the squad's camp just after midnight. Miran heard them first, the scrape of claws on rock, and she woke Do-hyun with a sharp click of her beak. Do-hyun was on his feet in less than a second. He built the fire higher, using every piece of dry material he could find, and the flames leaped up into the dark sky. The creatures paused at the edge of the firelight, their eyes reflecting orange and red like small burning coins. Most species in the galaxy had never mastered fire. It was wild, dangerous, and unpredictable, and the idea of using it as a tool was as foreign to them as breathing water. But humans had lived with fire for hundreds of thousands of years. They had cooked with it, warmed themselves with it, and used it to hold back the dark since before they had language to describe what they were doing. One of the creatures, larger than the others, stepped into the firelight and charged. Do-hyun stepped forward to meet it. He planted his feet, drew a breath deep into his chest, and let out a sound that came from somewhere ancient and primal inside him. It was a roar, a deep and thunderous human war shout that echoed off the rocks and filled the night like a living thing. The creature stopped. It skidded on the dust, its 6 legs scrambling, and it stared at Do-hyun with its burning eyes. Do-hyun stared back. He did not move. He did not blink. For 3 long seconds, the human and the predator faced each other in the firelight. The creature turned and ran. The pack followed. Behind Do-hyun, Voss was pressed against the rock wall, trembling. On the 4th day, Voss collapsed. His species could not regulate body temperature the way humans could, and the daytime heat had been cooking him from the inside for 3 days. He fell face first into the red dust and did not get up. His breathing was shallow, and his scales had turned a pale, sickly gray. Miran checked his vitals. "He will not make it to the extraction point," she said quietly. "Not on his feet." Voss opened his eyes and looked at Do-hyun. There was no pride left in his face. There was only exhaustion and the quiet acceptance of someone who believed he was about to be left behind. On his homeworld, the weak were abandoned. It was not cruelty. It was simply the way things worked. Do-hyun knelt beside him and slid his arms under Voss's body. Voss was heavy, much heavier than a human, and his scales were rough against Do-hyun's burned and blistered skin. "What are you doing?" Voss whispered. "Carrying you," Do-hyun said. He stood and he walked. For 18 hours Do-hyun carried Voss across the desert. He walked through the burning afternoon and into the cold night and through the burning morning that followed. His feet bled, his shoulders screamed, his body had not slept in 2 days, and his water was gone, and every step sent pain shooting up through his legs and into his spine. Mirren walked beside him, carrying what gear she could. Lewin walked on his other side, his cracked arm held close to his chest, and used his massive body to block the wind. They reached the extraction point at dawn on the 5th day. The monitoring officers were standing at the perimeter, and every single one of them stopped moving when they saw Do-hyun walk out of the desert, carrying a Sethari cadet on his back. Do-hyun set Voss down gently on the ground. He straightened up. He looked at the officers with eyes that were bloodshot and burned and exhausted beyond anything they had ever recorded. "My squad is complete," he said. "All 4, no one left behind." Then his legs gave out, and the red dust of Korath V rose up to meet him. Do-hyun woke up in a white room that hummed. The lights were soft, and the air was cool and clean. And for a moment he thought he was back in Busan, lying in his bed with the window open, and the sound of the ocean somewhere far below. Then the pain hit him all at once, a deep, heavy ache that ran from his feet to his shoulders, and he remembered everything. He was in the Academy's medical wing on Halon Prime. A thin Rathani nurse was standing beside his bed, adjusting something on a screen that displayed his vitals in colors he did not recognize. She looked at him with an expression that was halfway between professional concern and something that looked very much like disbelief. "You have been unconscious for 3 days," she said. "Your body suffered extreme dehydration, muscle damage in both legs, second-degree burns on your arms and face, and minor fractures in your left foot. Your recovery rate is—" She paused and looked at the screen again. "It is unusual." Do-hyun blinked. "Unusual how?" "Your tissue is regenerating at a rate we do not typically see in organic species. The fractures in your foot are already showing signs of fusion. The burns are healing without intervention." She turned to look at him fully. "Is this normal for your kind?" Do-hyun thought about it. He had broken his ankle once during training with Tae-sun in the mountains. He had walked on it for 2 days before going to a doctor. The doctor had told him it was already starting to heal on its own, and had called him stubborn. Tae-sun had called him something worse. "Yes," Do-hyun said, "this is normal." The nurse wrote something on her pad and left the room without another word. Over the next 3 days, word spread. It moved through the academy first, passed between cadets in whispers and shared data files. Then it moved to the station. Then it moved beyond the station entirely, carried on Union communication channels to 100 worlds and 1,000 listening posts. The story was simple, and it hit hard. A human cadet had completed the Korath C final exam. He had kept his entire squad alive in conditions that should have killed them, and when one of his squadmates collapsed, he had carried him across a desert for 18 hours without stopping. The reactions came in waves. Some species were afraid. The Sethari High Command sent a formal inquiry to the Union Council asking whether humans should be allowed to serve in the fleet at all. Their argument was practical and cold. If one unaugmented human could do what Do-hyun had done, what could 1,000 of them do? The Sethari had built their power on being the strongest and the most disciplined species in the Union, and the idea that a small, soft, sweating creature from a death world could outperform their best cadets made them feel something they were not used to feeling. They were scared, and scared Sethari were dangerous. Other species were inspired. Cadets from smaller, weaker species, the ones who had always been overlooked and pushed aside, began approaching Do-hyun as soon as he was released from the medical wing. A young Oshai with a damaged wing asked him how to build endurance. A small Dravari with thin, fragile crystal asked him how to survive pain. A species Do-hyun had never seen before, a soft, quiet creature with too many eyes and not enough confidence, asked him the simplest and most important question of all. How do you keep going when everything tells you to stop? Do-hyun looked at the small creature and thought about his cousin standing in the rain, thought about the taste of salt water and the sound of wind, thought about every morning he had gotten up when his body begged him to stay down. You decide that stopping is not something you do, he said, and then you keep deciding it every single moment until the moment passes. Commander Zal made his move on a Tuesday. He called Do-hyun to his office and informed him that his transfer status was under review due to irregularities in his documentation. The language was polite and the tone was professional, but the meaning was clear. Zal wanted him gone. Humans were disrupting the order of things, and Zal's species, the Sethari, did not tolerate disruption. Do-hyun sat in the chair across from Zal's desk and listened without interrupting. When Zal finished, Do-hyun nodded once and said, "I understand, Commander." He stood and walked to the door. Then he stopped. "Commander," he said without turning around, "on my planet there is a saying, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. But there is another version of that saying that my cousin taught me." He turned his head slightly. "Sometimes the nail holds the whole house together." He left before Zal could respond. What Zal did not know was that Yoon Jia had already made her move. Jia was a human intelligence officer who had been embedded in the Union's diplomatic corps on Halon Prime since before Do-hyun arrived. She was sharp, patient, and she had been waiting for exactly this moment. Within hours of Zal's attempt to expel Do-hyun, Jia filed Earth's formal application for full Union membership through the diplomatic channels. Attached to the application was a full, unredacted account of Do-hyun's performance at the Academy, including footage from Korath 6. The application landed on the desks of the Union Council like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples went everywhere. The graduation ceremony was held in the Grand Hall of Halon Prime, a vast circular chamber with a ceiling made of transparent crystal that showed the stars above. Every graduating cadet stood in formation, and the hall was filled with instructors, officers, diplomats, and observers from dozens of worlds. Do-hyun stood in the front row. His uniform was pressed and clean. The burns on his face had healed to faint pink lines that would fade completely within a month. His left foot still ached when he stood too long, but he stood anyway. The awards were given in order of merit. When the survival and hostile environments results were announced, Do-hyun's name was at the top. The hall was quiet when Instructor Wallace was called to the podium to present the final award. It was called the Unbroken Chain. It was given to any cadet who completed a field exam with their full squad intact under extraordinary circumstances. It had not been awarded in 47 years. Wallace stood at the podium and looked at Do-hyun for a long time. His forearms were stiff at his sides, and his face was unreadable. Then he spoke, and his voice was quieter than anyone had ever heard it. "I taught my cadets that no one could survive Earth," he said. "I showed them footage of fire and flood and war, and I told them that the creatures who lived on that world were something to be feared." He paused. "I was wrong. Earth does not just produce survivors. It produces people who refuse to let others fall." He held out the medal. It was a simple circle of dark metal with a chain link engraved on its surface. Do-hyun stepped forward and bowed. It was a deep, slow bow, the kind that in Korean culture showed genuine and profound respect. He took the medal and said, "Thank you, instructor." Wallace nodded once and stepped aside. After the ceremony, the hall emptied slowly. Cadets gathered in groups, families called from distant worlds, An officer shook hands with species that did not have hands. Do-hyun slipped away from it all, and found his way to the observation deck on the upper ring of the station. The deck was quiet. The stars spread out in every direction, a million points of light against the black, and somewhere out there, too far to see with bare eyes, was a small blue planet, orbiting an ordinary yellow star. She stood beside him and looked out at the same stars, and for a while, neither of them spoke. "I was afraid of you," she said finally, "when I found out what you were, where you came from. I thought you were a monster." Do-hyun did not look away from the stars. And now? Mirren was quiet for a moment. Her feathers shifted softly in the recycled air. "Now, I think Earth must be the loneliest place in the galaxy," she said. "To be that strong and that kind at the same time." Do-hyun smiled. It was a small, tired smile, the kind that came from somewhere deep and real. "It is not lonely," he said, "not when you carry people with you." They stood together in the silence for a while longer. Then Mirren left, and Do-hyun was alone with the stars. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his notebook, the one he had carried since his first day. He opened it to the last page, where the Korean script was neat and careful and steady, and he read the line he had written on his very first morning at the academy. "They think we are monsters. I will show them what we really are." Below it, he wrote one final line. "지구는 괴물을 만들지 않는다. 살아남는 사람을 만든다." Earth does not make monsters. It makes people who survive. He closed it into his jacket and walked to the docking bay, where a shuttle was waiting to take him to his first posting as a Union fleet officer. His footsteps echoed in the corridor, steady and even, the footsteps of a man who had learned a long time ago that the most important thing was not how hard the world hit you. It was whether you got up afterward and helped the person next to you get up too. Behind him, through the observation window, the stars burned on in their ancient, patient way. And somewhere among them, too small to see but impossible to forget, a blue dot turned slowly in the dark. It was still there. It was always there. And now the galaxy knew what it had made.